The seventh generation of consoles. It was no surprise for me that after the sixth generation, something extremely great was probably going to hit our doorstep just as soon as that generation was going to hit an impending close. As the quote goes, nothing lasts forever. Parting from the sixth gen was almost like a bittersweet farewell. Gone too soon, parting ways with what was arguably the golden age and the rise of new premises for better or for worse. My final session with my PS2 was a warm and quiet offering of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which felt like a subsequent goodbye from all the hooker falcon punching and jetpack insanity. With that fun aside, I tuned a lot into G4 TV back in the day. And let me tell you, that's where I found more and more information about the Xbox 360. Now, the Xbox 360 was already out when it hit shelves back in 2005, so a lot of diehard gamers who were PlayStation fans who wanted that next-gen eye candy in the 7th generation made that jump to Microsoft, and of course it's justified because so many big, impactful trailers started to hit the market, like the conception of Cliffy B's foray into madness with Gears of War, and a display of gigantic returning IPs like Halo 3 for the Xbox 360. A lot of people wanted a piece of the Microsoft pie back in the day. Unfortunately, my interest for the Xbox 360 did not peak even when this was the golden opportunity to snag a next-gen console early. Luckily for me, and luckily for being smart, and luckily for word of mouth, I looked at those failure rates that they had with the Red Ring of Death, and I decided to stay away from the Xbox as far as possible because I didn't want to deal with being on the phone constantly talking to tech support about my console being broken. The perks did spill around the grapevine though. I was aware that the 360 certainly was ahead of the curve with an early release, and it had a fair price point. Though all of my patience eventually paid off in the end because my relatives decided to up and get one anyway, so why would I get an Xbox 360 if I could just play it right there over their house? Despite how I felt, the Xbox 360 did not give off any permeating epicness initially. Gears of War and Halo, did they hold up? Yes, they did from what I played. Even though I thought that at best they were just flashes in the pan, something that I would play for 2 hours and then I would get bored and do something else. I wouldn't go astronomically insane for something like Halo. I didn't think it was as great of a killer app as some of the stuff that the PlayStation was producing at the time back in the 6th generation. But it had its fundamental values, and the occasional splatter kill on a ghost never got old for me. The controller of the 360 was a nice improvement over the original hold of the Xbox. No longer it felt like I needed these grizzly bear lumberjack hands to hold this thing and get a grip on it tight. It was filed down to a nice, sizable degree, and I guess that this was one of the last Microsoft consoles that I could actually give praise that I barely had any problems with before the Xbox One and only gave us a lot of horrific trouble to deal with. And it was just the start of some bad baby steps, but I'll get into that at a later date. Anyway, my target was set on one thing and one thing only, and it was during the summer vacation of 2006 and the year after getting my hands on that marvelous, black, elegant, sleek machine known as the Sony PlayStation 3. Now, I am a man of tradition. I had already been introduced to the Sony PlayStation family at an early age, so I figured as a growing adult and as a collector, it is time to add another number entry in my collection. Although, the pricing for the US units of the Sony PlayStation 3 was not the most desirable information that I wanted to hear at half of $1,000. It was a make it or break it deal for a lot of gamers, even for me. And I would go as far as to say that Sony had it the fucking worst during the 7th generation of consoles when it came to these ridiculous price points and the cell processor, which a lot of developers truly didn't want to deal with, and it was only a headache to get around. While this is entirely their fault, and it put them behind in the 7th generation, I am glad that they did learn from their mistakes when it came to the architecture. I will go on record and state that there were many great showcases still for the PS3, and some of their exclusives really was going strong, like Metal Gear Solid 4, Uncharted 2, and God of War 3, my personal favorite. Of course, this is when the console got me hooked on board to more appeasing things when I saw them, and that was definitely the first party exclusives. Back then, they were really important when they met the eye. The price was steep, but the reward for high quality video games was worthy to reap the benefits from. So after so many impressive displays and E3s of many, I decided to get more and more invested into wanting a Sony PlayStation 3. At last, the opportunity knocked on my birthday when I unwrapped my launch Sony PlayStation 3, and it was heavier than carrying a bag of bricks across the Georgia state line. It was about time to fire up this beastly beauty. I recently just got Resistance Fallen Man by the time I got this on launch. Looking back at this game now, it was definitely very rough around the edges to hop back into after the sense of speed and mechanics took an astronomical leap with later FPS games. I couldn't complain much. For what it was an alien World War shooter, and I got my money's worth on a sizable launch title. After playing this on and on and on, it just made me curious to have more games in store to have fun with. This led me to one of the biggest problems that happened with the PlayStation 3 during the launch cycle. It's like a drunk's moment of clarity, or a flashlight finally coming on in your mind. When the light bulb flashed, I felt like it was an eternity waiting for some actual good games to hit the machine. More and more, I felt that after grabbing this machine in 2007, the PlayStation 3 didn't really hit the ground until 2008, when multiplats and first-party titles and newer titles came into the equation. The PlayStation 3 is certainly the console with the most peculiar changes in the 7th generation. Not only with what I stated, but with the sale and the price, but with the triggers of the D-pad that were odd and very janky, and the laggy X and B as a browser. I would say in terms of accessibility and price point, this would be the only time where Microsoft actually got a leg up on Sony almost constantly. For what it was though, I still enjoyed the PS3. It got a lot of steam near the end of its life cycle that I could appreciate, and it still showed that Sony wasn't going down without a fight. Nintendo was something that I was late to the game with. I didn't snag a Wii until the end of its life cycle, until it was done, and until it was finished. And that was mainly because I needed to use something as a hive for backwards compatibility. Something that I despised that was getting removed from consoles late last gen, even with the PlayStation 3. I needed a quick GameCube, so my Wii was the sacrificial lamb for Resident Evil titles, since I didn't figure that Capcom were going to make the HD remasters of the exclusive games tied to the system, like Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil Remake. I really didn't use the Wii for much else actually. As a matter of fact, it's a dustbin. I don't even think I own an official Wii game on the system. I heard a lot of good things about it, however, and somehow, someway, I think that Nintendo must have did something right, considering that PlayStation ripped them off with the PlayStation Move. I will admit, playing things like No More Heroes emulated on my PC served as a nice little treat, and even if it wasn't on the Wii, I could see myself playing that game for endless hours no matter what system it's on. Nintendo still had a fire of third-party talent. It was something near and dear that is absent in the gen after, unfortunately. In conclusion, the 7th generation picked up steam very late in its development cycles. It fell short of grace with some things that were going on, such as DLC, the beginning of microtransactions, and a higher failure rate of consoles compared to the old. That served to be more of a headache than a fun aspect to this whole scenario. Compared to other generations, this one was the one that was the rise of disappointment. There were many cool implementations, such as still keeping some backwards compatibility features for some consoles, the ability to play with our friends online with less of a hassle. However, I think that the launch of certain platforms could have been done and handled particularly better. Maybe they could have introduced some better pricing. Maybe they could have put more work into their launch titles. It just seemed like a mess initially until it all got better. But sadly from here, chronologically, things only get just a little bit more disappointing.
I'd say, oh yeah, that's nice.